In fact, to be honest, you may be better off if you have none of those, because that's where a lot of the indoctrination happens about what this world is and, what life is and who is spiritual and who is not and all this kind of stuff. What is good? What is bad? Sometimes if we don't have those ideas instilled in us, intelligence remains high.
Anoop, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Boo Boo. Good to meet you here.
You're a body strategist, author, and ER physician. That's amazing.
Yes, mind-body strategist. Yeah.
Okay.
That's something I coined because I didn't know how to really describe what I did and what I saw. But yes, and then author of the 2 books you have behind you, and yes, an emergency physician.
Which I just got them, so I haven't read them fully, but they're awesome. Thank you. You have a near-death experience, or near-death-like experience / mystical experience. I was wondering if you would love to touch on that, because it's profound.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to call it. I didn't call it anything for probably a decade or so, and then I guess some people started asking about it, and now all the interviews I'm talking about it. So whatever it was very dramatic at the time. And also I think an important aspect of it that I think is not always brought out in the interviews is that it's continuing today. That's really important aspect of it. It's not something that ended. There was an end to certain parts of it, but it never really ended. But the short story is that I was in my room in medical school, back home actually, during a break, and was reading something when it felt like there was an explosion that happened. And it felt like I was sitting in the sun is how I describe it, the best way I can describe it. And by that I mean all that existed was this brilliant orangish saffron blaze. And, the body wasn't there and the room wasn't there, and it was just this. And it was me as this, me sitting in this, me absorbed as this. And it was peaceful and it was timeless. And then at some point, it was almost like a completion, a sense of completion. And I was going to pass through this blaze phase, so to speak, and into what's next. And at that point, just as I was about to pass, an aspect of this blaze communicated to me that this wasn't fair. That was the sense that was communicated to me. That it's not fair, that there are things remaining to do, and a couple things like that. That sense was intimated, and that gave me pause because I knew it was true. As soon as it was communicated, it was so meaningful and so true that, you cannot ignore something like that. So that gave my forward march pause. And as soon as I paused, it felt like all the things that were remaining to be done snapped back, like the rubber band snapped back, and everything re-imploded. And, here everything was the same as it was before, and also totally different than it was before. It appeared as if everything were constructed out of light, that the room was constructed out of light, that the space that is often thought to be empty, even though we intellectually know it's not, you could see that it was something. It was constructed out of something. The same for, intuition and thoughts and space and time and all these things that we talk about and experience. So that lasted for some time. I'm not sure what the period of time was. And then eventually I got up and went to the bathroom. I think it was curiosity. I'm not sure. why I went, but I went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person in the mirror. And because one of the things was this person looked so pleasant and so, I would say, happy, like genuinely deeply happy. And I think until then, like I had been restless, had been looking for something. And slowly thoughts started filtering in, and then it became clear that thoughts were, in a sense, absolutely unnecessary. I say that carefully because I think that can be easily misunderstood. But, in order to receive a stimulus and to respond intelligently doesn't require thought, as the human body is evidence of that. We call that reflexes or the autonomic nervous system. But I think that line between the autonomic and what we consider voluntary can shift. And what we consider individual agency, all of these can shift. So I like to say that the experience never ended, although it seems like the flashy part ended, but in fact it didn't. It continued to wax and wane throughout and still does today. And so it's just a different view of life that continues.
So that's not considered a near-death experience in some people's eyes. Is that what you're saying?
All right. So I actually somehow I got put in touch with the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And what she told me is that this is a near-death-like experience and not a near-death experience because the body wasn't actually in danger of dying. So a lot of times this happens when a person is in an accident or a coma, severe infection. There are a lot of stories like that, severe disease. And as that person is about to leave the body, or sometimes something happens, and that's called a near-death experience, and then they come back and then the body continues to live. This is near-death-like because there was no threat to the body. Although, in retrospect, sometimes I think, had that gone on to completion, the body would have been dead. And I like to, think of all the headlines that would have been, medical student overdoses on, or like medical student, couldn't handle the pressures of medical, who knows, what the story would have been, but I like to think about that. So because the body wasn't in threat, supposedly, although like I said, it absolutely was, the body would have dropped. But the stimulus for the dropping of the body was not from the physical world. And so it's not considered a near-death experience. Some people call it an STE, spiritually transformative experience. I've heard all kinds of different phrasings. I don't think it really matters what the phrasing is. I think these kinds of things happen a lot. They've happened, since the dawn of human life. And they're just showing us a bigger picture than a lot of the miseducation that happens in our society.
Kind of reminds me of the last part of the St. Francis prayer. It is only by dying that one awakens to eternal life.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I've had a
And
similar experience as you.
okay, you want to let's share that.
Not as detailed as you,
Yeah.
but I remember being in Ohio, right? I
Yeah.
moved to Ohio and working in Ohio in the woods,
Yeah.
and there's no restroom. So I have to go to the restroom in the woods. That's where they send me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm looking into like a weed or a flower, height distance, and I'm looking right in front of it. And I looked inside the flower. Next thing you know, I had an outer body experience. And it was like a state of pure consciousness where I didn't identify with the mind and the body. As a matter of fact, I didn't exist. And the conditioned mind is no longer. And I realized that I am the awareness or that consciousness behind it all, not the thoughts and the emotions itself. And for the longest, I was always so attached to that stuff. It was driving me, right? And now I have I'm living more in a state of awareness where I'm separated from it and I can make better choices, better decisions, less reactive, less ego sensitive, and I've become more life sensitive, if that makes sense. And it's changed my whole life. I've had a number of awakenings, like you said, and I appreciate you saying that because a lot of people think it's just a one-time event, but it's
Yeah.
a continuous process, like a flower it's continuing to open up, and sometimes I have to go back in the mud and die a little
Yeah.
bit and
Yeah.
continue to grow. Like Thich Nhat Hanh would say, no mud, no lotus. And I love that.
Yes. Yes. It is a series of deaths. And it's death after death after death after death. And it gets more and more beautiful with each death. And I think that's so important. You said initially a quote like something, you have to die to live, or you have to die to be awake. And yeah, that's true. One is that we have to die to all of the misconceptions that are taught in our society about birth and death, that we began with birth, that we end with death, that we no longer live after death. People forget that the opposite of death is birth, and the opposite of death is not life. So death does not oppose life. A person is as much alive before death as they are after death. And that is one of the biggest misconceptions in our society that causes tremendous amount of suffering for families, for people at the end of life care, so much there. And the other thing that your story reminded me of is that the world is, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but the world, what we call the world, is fundamentally, let's call it consciousness. It is not a material thing. It is consciousness itself that is experienced as though material, just as it happens in a dream. And if that's true, that's the hypothesis that I'm offering. If that's true, then there is only consciousness, in a sense, right? There are no real arguments. Like, you can look at it through different philosophies, spiritualities, religions, atheism, agnosticism, direct experience, mysticism. I mean, it's all fun. They're all different views. But if that's true, there's no real contradiction. There's nothing to fight against, per se. Like the fights that we experience are the fights that we engage in and we choose. It's not that they're fundamentally there. And moreover, if consciousness is fundamental, then everything is a gateway, right? So people talk about, how can I experience something? How can I know this, etc.? And religion and spirituality tend to direct us in certain ways. But if we play with this hypothesis first, that consciousness is fundamental and therefore it is what it is, then everything is a gateway. It doesn't have to be something spiritual. It doesn't have to be something religious. It doesn't have to be, it can be anything. And that's what I think classically religious and spiritual people maybe don't want to say, or, don't want to venture into that, because then spirituality also kind of becomes something special. You mentioned a flower. Your portal was a flower, and it can be the geometry of the flower, which is stunning. It can be the color, the frequency of the flower, which is also stunning. It can be how it grows from the soil and what that represents. It can be so many things, right? And none of these, I'm intellectualizing it in English as a conceptual story, but when it's experienced, it's none of those things. It's just beauty and depth and connection. So that's one thing that's important to know, is that everything is a gateway. Everything. In that sense, there's no good and bad, although good and bad are useful in our daily lives.
So it's all beyond belief.
It's so far beyond belief. It has nothing to do with belief. Belief is a tool that we can use, for the human mind to linearly traverse a certain path. But belief by itself is not needed. In fact, many people don't believe at all. But when you're gripped by reality and your eyes are opened, it's not about thought.
Yeah, Gandhi once said, in heaven, there is no religion. Thank God.
Yeah. Right.
Your book, Is This a Dream? A lot of my listeners probably never heard of your book and will probably get it. I've already talked to a few people that are buying it, which is right in back of me. Would you like to walk us through that a little bit to give us a little broader or better understanding?
Yeah. I don't know how much I remember of it, to be honest.
No problem.
But I think it was written as, it's a relatively short book. But I kind of replied to myself a lot of the questions that either I had or people had asked me that I felt were not clear in the classically spiritual path. That I think we use a lot of words: consciousness, enlightenment, ego. I don't know, those are some of the popular ones, but there are a lot of popular words, karma and so on, that have become standardized, which I think is good, because it allows people to dissect it and dive into it more and more. but I don't feel like had clear kind of indicators in a lot of what I saw. And I also happened to be exposed to Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-duality, since I was in elementary school. I was heavily steeped in it, was surrounded by people who were exploring it, who had dedicated their lives to it. And so I was fortunate to have a different perspective than many of the writings that I've seen about somebody who's experienced something and wrote something about spirituality or so on. So it was kind of to reconcile all that and put that somewhere on record, for anyone who's at that juncture. I think that was the kind of spirit of the book. And also, in a sense, to some extent, to also leave it behind and move on. And I think that's part of why I don't necessarily remember a lot of it. Anything you say, I'm sure I'll remember it and I can comment on it. But it was also to move on from some of those ideas and the experiences that can be described in that way.
Hmm. I heard you talk about UAPs or UFOs. What do you
Yeah.
believe about UFOs, or were you shown anything when you had that
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. Um, I won't tell you what I believe. I'll tell you what I experience.
Awesome.
So, yes, I have seen UAPs once when I was outside, for example. So I should say that when this happens, when the mind opens, which is my probably favorite way of describing what happens, is the opening of the mind, the opening of the heart, the opening of the human personality, to recognizing more of the full human being that all of us are. Nobody's special in that way here. We're all special in our unique expressions, but nobody's fundamentally special in their constitution or in their capacity. And so, when that opening happens, you can't be like, delusion starts to fall away. And there are many delusions in our society, usually that are taught, through education and even religion and spirituality and so on. So, I think when that happens, perception opens up. So I was very much living in what I would call multiple dimensions, right? So this is one slice of space and time that we're calling planet Earth and 2023 and, all these kinds of things. But there are infinite dimensions and slices and timelines and so on. And so one of the things I experienced was life on what we would call other planets. And just beautiful structures, beautiful buildings, beautiful energy, lightful places, other beings, other anatomy, different kinds of anatomy, all kinds of things. And this gets into, we can go endless connections with this, but let me stop with that. But so that was my experience. And seeing this as something different went away. Seeing this, what we would call this physical life, for Anoop sitting here talking to Boo Boo in the background and what we call the physical world, and that being quote unquote real, and everything else being imagination or vision or hallucination or dream. That nonsense started to go away because the boundaries between all of this just started to evaporate, and it became one seamless tapestry. And all it is where does the focus of attention go? Then that dimension becomes vivid and comes into experience. It is just an infinite, vivid masterpiece of possibility and expression that has no limitation in space or time. These are all human Homo sapien ideas and cultural ideas about space and time. There's absolutely no limitation as to what we are. We're not even human beings in our entirety, in our fullness, right? A human is a form that we take. Not just Anoop or Boo Boo, but even human is a form. And then there's being itself, which is far beyond human. So in experiencing this, I came to see that there's life on many planets. And then sometimes I would, when I go outside, I would get a message, look up, and one time I looked up and there was this was in Vermont, I believe, huge light, what would you call it? A sphere, not a sphere, kind of a flat ovoid, brilliant light, that as soon as you experienced it, it was healing. You felt the healing energy pass through the entire body. And again, a side note, that space and time are structured in such a way that everything is always accessible. So that experience is still ongoing now, in a way. It's recorded here somewhere and is accessible again in some way. So all of these kinds of experiences, and also even like experience of so-called alien abduction, experience of like being taken. I had that experience also. And so there are all kinds of things happening. And generally, all this kind of stuff is tamped down. You're not supposed to think about it. If you think about it, you're not rational. You're not sticking within the materialist framework, linear space-time, birth and death is the end all be all. Follow your religion. Anything that goes out of this is considered, dangerous or a threat to the kind of the structures in society. So it's generally talked down. But the fact is, this is the reality. This is where joy lives. This is where possibility lives. This is where all the answers are to everything that every human being is seeking.
Thank you. Yeah, I recently had Natasha Venter on, and she's a psychic medium, and I asked her a similar question, and I asked her, what was the purpose of reincarnation, and can we bring stuff from past lives into the present, like trauma?
Yeah, it's not even can we, it's how can we not? It's how would I say this? It's like, let's say I were making a salad and I had a big cucumber and I sliced some of that into a salad, right? And then somebody ate the salad and say, oh, this is a delicious cucumber or delicious salad, I like to have another salad. Now I have the same cucumber that I took the initial slices from, right? Now I cut some new slices of cucumber from that same large cucumber in the new salad. And somebody says, well, this cucumber is amazing too. The first one was amazing. This is amazing too. How is that possible? Well, we'd say, of course it's possible. It's the same cucumber. Like you're eating the same thing in a different bowl, in a different form. And that's the same thing that's happening now. What we see as a physical body and as a personality and as a mind, a local mind, is a fraction of what we are. Only a fraction of what we are expresses in a lifetime. The vast majority of what we are is here outside this perceptual domain, which is what we call outside of the lifetime, right? What we call a lifetime is a space-time domain. Outside of this domain is where most of us is, most of what we are is. And we project an aspect of us with a certain kind of experience, a certain kind of proclivity into that environment in which certain things can be experienced. So of course we carry things from other lifetimes. Of course, that's the whole purpose, in a sense, you could say. It comes in for an experience, and whatever's not reconciled, that goes somewhere else, and you have another experience. And, there are people who do this healings. I think there's a psychiatrist I think his name's Brian Weiss, I believe, who helps people heal. Nothing works for them until this paradigm of another life, previous lifetime. Then they access all kinds of things and they heal from all kinds of conditions, So I think this has to be a standard understanding in society. This is not spirituality. This is not religion. This is not philosophy. This is the reality of your life, that you have lived many lifetimes and you will live more lifetimes. Whether it's with this body or another dense body or not is a different question. But there is no death. There's no ending or stopping per se. There's only changing forms.
You mentioned in your book, love is at the root of who we really are.
Yeah.
Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
For me, love is what keeps me here. So I happen to be an emergency physician. And for me, being in the ER and seeing that suffering it's challenging. I feel that pain, and at the same time, because I feel that pain, it brings out the love even more. Mm-hmm. And it keeps me here to do the work that I'm doing, Otherwise, and, the love for my family members, the love for my community, the love for my fellow colleagues, who also suffer so much. The physician suicide rate in the US is twice that of the general population. Think about that. Physicians are killing themselves at 2 times the rate of non-physicians in the United States. That is the state of healthcare today. That is one of the most damning statistics in healthcare that's never talked about. And then we do online modules for wellness and all this kind of stuff, and so often just like misses the mark on what is real and what is needed. And so that love for others and what's happening is what keeps me here and keeps me doing what I do. And I think that kind of love that is shared with others comes from a deeper place. As we said before, if the hypothesis is that consciousness is fundamental, then everything is one, right? Or everything is not two. There's no fundamental separation. There's only superimposition of separation. And so when separation is superimposed, a great example is right here, right? We have 2 screens and there's a boundary superimposed in between, right? So it looks like 2 separate screens, but my screen is just one, right? But we don't see that. We see 2 things. We see 2 space-time locations, but it's actually one. And on that is superimposed duality, this duality. And it's like that for everything. For every boundary you see, whether it's physical, mental, intuitional, anything, it is a superimposition in this infinite sphere of intelligence. And so when that's the case, the experience, when one is aware of that unity and when one is expressing through the apparent multiplicity, when those two are held together, that feeling is love. Because you are aware of the unity as you are aware of the multiplicity. And then there's this, cycle then, I think, of love that keeps coming up. If it's just the multiplicity, then you can kind of get detached, or you get lost in that multiplicity, right? If it's just the unity, then at some point it's not even just love, it's just something beyond that. It is existence itself. But when these two are there together, there's this churning of love.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's the purpose of me creating this podcast. It's hard to not tap into our true self and realize, and be in harmony with the oneness of life, be more in harmony, and not want to make change, not want to help prevent suffering, for unnecessary suffering and ignorance with the world around us. So try to be more in the solution. And, if this is a dream, why not create a happy dream versus a nightmare?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is what it is, and we have the abilities that we have. So let's use it. Let's live it out,
Health Revolution. How'd you come about creating that? And what are the 3 minds you teach? Because I'm very interested in taking your courses.
Okay. So let me start with the 3 minds. The 3 minds basically came as a result of this experience and wanting to communicate it and not finding an adequate language. And so what I say in the 3 minds is that consciousness is fundamental. That's a hypothesis. And that this consciousness can be experienced through 3 different configurations of identity. And so what I'm saying is that the world looks the way it looks to anyone because of the way identity is configured. Okay, and these 3 configurations are as follows. The first mind configuration is that of localized identity. All right, so it is when the experience is that I am this thing, and that thing can be this body, this mind, this personality, this thought, whatever it is, anything that can be localized and distinctly indicated. Taking oneself to be that is the first mind condition. And in that condition, because everything is consciousness, is the hypothesis, when there is localization and a sense of boundary that happens, then that is also reflected everywhere. It's not just in one place. And so to the extent that one experiences oneself as localized and distinct, to that extent, one experiences a world of localization and distinction. This space is different from that space. This time is different from that time. This laptop is different from the space next to it. right? This finger is different from this finger. Everything is different, because the state of boundedness, the state of the boundary, the existence of the boundary is what is the sine qua non of the first mind condition. And this is the standard condition in society. Usually, at least in public society, people experience differently, of course, but that which is talked about, that which is taught as science, that which is taught as, understanding the world, all this is the first mind condition predominantly. And this also is why we see a lot of suffering, right? The more things are restricted, boundary of a lifetime, boundary of an individual, boundary of a personality, and pinned on one thing rather than on the interconnection and on the widespread, let's say, seamlessness of things, the more disease will be experienced because it is running contrary to a fundamental reality. So this is the first mind condition. The second mind condition is the experience that what I am fundamentally is not localized, or to put it in a positive way, what I am is infinite. And what does this mean? This means that the experience of being localized in one place is not primary. That has been released, and instead the experience is of boundlessness and seamlessness. And appearing in that is a series of wavy boundaries, let's say, a series of localizing. So it's not that things are localized with a D at the end, but it's that things are always localizing. So the laptop is kind of like a form of energy that is in a state of existence with me, with you, with everything that it is interacting with, and so on with the whole world. And so with this, there's a tremendous release of tension in the human system. There's a tremendous feeling of ease that comes with this. And there's the release of all kinds of delusions that are part of the standard narrative in society. This is the second mind condition. And by the way, there are no hard lines between these. I'm just describing general ranges, right? And then the third mind condition is simply that of pure potential. So it is this, the third mind, that can express as the localizing / non-local second mind, and as the localized first mind, right? So it's different levels of crystallization or different levels of distillation of potential that is experienced as a world, a dimension, worlds, lifetimes, things, objects, and so forth. And the power of this is to recognize this. I mean, this covers everything. This covers anything that a human could possibly do and understand about the world, or about the universe. I mean, it's a framework, I'm saying, for doing that. And the beautiful thing is you don't need any education for this. You don't need an MD, a PhD, you don't need a bachelor's, you don't need high school. In fact, to be honest, you may be better off if you have none of those. Because that's where a lot of the indoctrination happens about what this world is and, what life is and who is spiritual and who is not and all this kind of stuff. What is good, what is bad. Sometimes if we don't have those ideas instilled in us, intelligence remains high. But as soon as those come in, you get a kind of warped or a very defined kind of intelligence, rather than that natural genius that everybody has. So these are the three minds. From the health revolution, the reason health revolution came about is because I had been communicating for several years about all kinds of things, including at some point the three minds. But then I hadn't fully connected it with being an ER doctor. And with my patients that I was seeing. I have so many stories from the ER, that I have. I'll tell you one really quickly is when, one of my patients in residency, so I'm in training, and I think I'm in my third or fourth year of training after medical school in the ER now. And one of my patients said, "So are you going to stay here after you're done?" This is in Philadelphia. "Are you going to stay here when you're done?" And I said, "Well, I'll probably move away, probably move back, closer to where I was before." And then she's like, "Yeah, you all leave after you train. You all leave us." And that part of the city was very rough. There was a lot of violence, there was a lot of poverty. And she was right. She hit me like a ton of bricks with that truth. She said, "Yeah, you come here." And she said, you practice on us. That's what she said. You basically practice on us. You get your skills. you get your salary, you get your money, you get your prestige, and then you leave. Like, damn, that's so true. You know, like, how can you argue with that? If you have any like heart and openness, you just say guilty, you know? And that's what I felt. And things like that, many things like that happened. And so, and I felt like I wasn't being true to that. You know, I still hadn't, even though I had come back, so to speak, with the body, I still hadn't fully come back, you know? And so Health Revolution, I said, I need to put this in terms of healthcare and health and diseases and diagnoses and treatments, and speak the language of healthcare as much as I can. You know, I can't only speak that language. I just can't do it anymore. I need to speak much more expansively and talk about all kinds of things, including UAPs and consciousness and all kinds of stuff. But to me, that's what health is. Health begins with nutrition of the mind, you know, which is telling the truth about what's happening in this world. Truth heals. Truth heals. And so to bring this to the world and to keep myself honest, I had this idea. I was like, I have to start this thing. I have to start something like a school or something like a something. And at that time, Srisha, who is now my co-founder, she had watched one of my interviews and contacted me because she had some questions. And then I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I'll answer your questions and you help me do this. She said, deal. So we started Health Revolution together. Our mission is to shift the state of society from disease to healing. And we see a world where everyone is expressing their potential, developing and expressing their potential. Health to us is the expression of human potential, period. Nothing less than that. I will not give health over to some, you know, small definition that keeps people small about the way the body is or even the way the mind is or something like that. No, it is the expression of your potential, and healing is the development of that potential. So this is why we set up Health Revolution. We talk about the 4 engines of nutrition, movement, connection, and rest that are the pathways to healing for all people in all times. It is these 4 things: nutrition, movement, connection, and rest across the mind and body. You can check that out in the Jumpstart course, which I'm sure you'll talk about. But that is Health Revolution in a nutshell.
I appreciate that. I'm excited to look into it and join it. Being a physician, I would love to ask you a question. As an ex-alcoholic, do you see our system, or do you link a lot of modern sciences, like Gabor Mate is talking a lot about trauma, linking trauma with addiction and other diseases, because it becomes trapped. All that stuff becomes trapped inside of us, and we look for relief. And through that repetition, it becomes, you know, habitualized, right? How can we prevent addiction and other diseases as individuals and at a collective level to promote more health and wholeness? Because I love how in your book you mentioned the word healing derives from the word whole, and trauma is a loss of self, as Dr. Peter Levine likes to say. It's the loss of self, and recovery is to regain, to get back.
Yeah, and that's everything, right? That's what we talked about as the first mind versus the second mind, about the whole and the part, about trauma kind of, you know, creating a divide within a being. And that's what education does. Most of education in the world, not just that east-west divide is lessening and lessening, you know. Most education all around the world divides the human being and doesn't show them much of what they are. And so education is fundamentally traumatic in most cases, and most people don't realize that. We think we're getting smarter, but in many cases we're getting less intelligent the more we learn. Though we might get the awards and the salary and all that, but the actual native intelligence is actually diminishing. So in terms of what we can do, I mean, nothing fancy. The biggest thing is learn to see ourselves and other people more completely, and learn to express and show ourselves and other people more completely. You know, that it's okay to be the whole person, to show the whole person. You know, one thing I tell my son now, who's 12 years old, and I said, you know, if you're angry or you're feeling angsty or something, you know, about what's happening at school or world, I said, good. That is exactly how you should feel. Because if you don't feel that, there's something like our society is doing a lot of things that are harming people. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of suffering, you know? So that just means that you are feeling the things that are happening, right? So now let's talk about what is true, what is happening in society, and how do we change this together? You know, those are the kinds of conversations I try to have with him, rather than saying, don't be angry, be happy, meditate that away, or, no, it's not about that. Like, look at what's happening. You have very good reason to feel the way you feel. And we don't do that with people. If I am uncomfortable with a part of myself, I am uncomfortable with that in the next person, and I don't want to see it in them, and I don't want to see them express it, and I don't want them to cry then. Right? So, don't cry. We tell all babies, don't cry, wipe their eyes. No, we shouldn't do that. We should say thank you for showing us what is happening and for what we are not willing to face as adults. That is how we heal trauma. That is how we create a space where trauma doesn't happen.
Yeah, Dr. Peter Levine has a book called Trauma Proofing Your Kids. And when I first read that, I started crying because I didn't know how to be a parent, and I don't have to blame my parents either, because we only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And I was like unconscious of certain things in masculinity and how much that affected me, or not being able to process or communicate or have the coping skills to deal with certain events that were happening that may be hurtful to me. And if I push that stuff down, it only creates some type of disease or some kind of disunity within myself later down the line. And then I look for stuff to get out of self, right?
Yeah.
And I was so unaware of that, and I started to realize, like, how many millions of people are so unaware of that, just like me. And so I love when people like yourself and professionals like yourself and just great minds and loving hearts that really just talk about that stuff and say it's okay to feel, it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
So I always thought, be a big boy, don't be a little girl, don't cry, and that hurts people, not knowing that.
Yeah. I think feeling and seeing are the original intelligence. Feeling and seeing are aspects of themselves, are aspects of the same thing, of the same intelligence, right? Of the same presence. And like thinking comes way, way down the line and is subject to all kinds of stuff, but like the original intelligence is that feeling, seeing intelligence. And I think, and we don't learn that, what we learn is that concepts and things like that are what is intelligent and what gets you ahead in society. So yes, I think that is essential to kind of put that out there. And especially, as you said, for doctors or people with degrees, people with positions of authority, usually these are people that have valued thought and brought thought out. And thought is also important when it's aligned with the greater human being, and that's a process that keeps going on. I was talking to my wife about this recently. It's something that is still happening with me and will happen with me throughout this lifetime and beyond. It's a continuing alignment and adjusting in relationship with what is happening around us.
Yeah, Tupac once said, let's change the way we live, let's change the way we eat, and let's change the way we treat each other. The old way isn't working, and it's up to us to do what we got to do to survive. How would you elaborate on that?
I wouldn't elaborate on that. That's perfect. It's complete.
Perfect answer. Any last words you would like to talk about?
I would just say that we are all infinite beings. And we have infinite access and we have infinite potential. And this is a time in this planet, in the evolution of this planet, where we're seeing that more and more. We're seeing both the expression of that more and more and the desire to see that more and more, either through mystical experiences or psychedelic experiences or, all kinds of stuff, or the desire to create AI and see how amazing AI could be, this desire to know ourselves through AI. It's all like symbols of this, and at the same time, the suppression of that, the not knowing of that, the subconscious aspect of that also is the polarity, so there's this kind of juxtaposition, this back and forth, like this is that time. You can look at the news, you can look at current events, and you can see all of this happening. And there are many ways we can take this, but I say the way to take this is to see that we are infinite beings, that this truth is coming to the surface, and that nothing can stop us when we see this and access this and claim what is our own nature.
I love that. I've heard you talk about AI, and a lot of people are worried about AI. They're worried about what's going to happen. Are we going to lose jobs and et cetera, et cetera? No one knows what to expect. Some people are excited. But you also talk about NI really quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Frankly, I think a lot of those things are going to happen with AI. There's so much to say about it, but I'll just talk about NI, which is that AI comes from NI. NI is natural intelligence, and nobody seems to care about NI, right? We're all so fascinated with AI, but we forget that we came up with it. So which intelligence is greater? The intelligence that was created or the creator of that intelligence, right? Another similar question, which is greater? Yours or my intelligence as individuals, or whatever the heck this universe is, or where this universe comes from? Obviously, that intelligence is greater than us as individuals. And in the exact same way, which is greater, AI or NI? It is NI. There is no doubt about it. But because of a lot of the misconceptions and various reasons, we access only a fraction of NI. And even with that fraction, we create something as powerful as AI. And frankly, with a lot of problematic potential as AI, because we don't know what we're doing actually. We don't know where AI is coming from. It's coming from our desire to know ourselves. And it's like, what can I create? What can I do? How amazing can I, what all can I do? How can I take over this and that? Because why? Because there's a fundamental lack in that intelligence that's creating it. It does not recognize itself in its full potential, in which case it wouldn't need to create AI, because its natural intelligence could make all the things happen that we want to make happen with AI without the side effects.
I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for
And
having me.
thank you. Talk to you soon.